scripture reading that we're going to use as our jumping off point is found in your bulletins. Genesis 27, 1 through 10. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food that I like and bring it to me to eat so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son, catch that? Isaac spoke to his son. Rebekah said to her son, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau," notice that. He didn't say, "My son, Esau," but your brother. "Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." The story of Jacob, Esau, Isaac, and Rebekah, a story which we oftentimes interpret as being about a sibling rivalry, is a story that has troubled scholars and Bible readers for a long, long time. And it bothers us because we wonder, how can God bless Jacob when he's such a scoundrel? And it's not fair. It bothers us. And in fact, when you read this story, the characters who are the most sympathetic are Isaac and Esau. And yet, what we do, what most commentators do most of the time when we read this thing, because we realize that God blesses Jacob and he doesn't bless Isaac and he doesn't bless Esau, we look for somehow to justify God's behavior. And so lots of times we end up saying, well, Esau must have been calloused and uncaring and was just a brute. And then Isaac was like Homer Simpson, that he had no clue what he was doing, so he just doesn't know what's going on. And that Jacob actually, was this pretty nice guy and something like that. But the truth of the matter is that Jacob is a scoundrel. There is no redeeming qualities in him. And this is a difficult sermon to preach. And that Isaac, he is a good guy. And that Esau is the more favorable person. And Rebekah, what can you say about Rebekah? She's a liar, she's a thief, she's a scoundrel. And so it's a difficult and troubling story to read. And so today what I want to do is to look at this story again. We're going to look at the deception of Isaac that Jacob and Rebekah do to him. So we're going to look at chapter 27 up through chapter 28, verse 8. We're looking at just the deception thing today. And so let's look at how the story starts out. Isaac is old and he's blind. He's 100 years old. And he thinks that he's going to die any moment now. And he actually doesn't die for another 85 years. And so that tells me a couple of things. Is that either Isaac realizes that he's got a bucket list and he wants to get stuff done. And on his bucket list is he needs to bless his boys. Or life is so hard and miserable for Isaac at this point in his life that he wants to die. That he's miserable. And my suspicion, this is just my opinion, but my suspicion is it's the latter. Is that life is tough for Isaac right now and he wants to die. He's tired of living. Things aren't working out the way that he wants things to work out at all. He knows that he needs to bless Jacob with the Abraham promise. And the reason that he knows that is because he is aware that Jacob tricked his older brother Esau by a few minutes, they're twins, out of the blessing for the bean stew. And so he is aware of that Jacob is the one, because he's the firstborn, the legally firstborn. He gets the Abraham blessing, the promised land of many descendants, and whoever blesses you, I will bless. Whoever curses you, I will curse. But Isaac loves Esau. And so he wants to give Esau a blessing. And the blessing that he wants to give him is a blessing of economic, agricultural prosperity. That's what he wants. It's not the Abraham blessing. It's a different blessing. And so Rebekah is listening to this. She is eavesdropping on him when he says to Esau, go get your stuff, go out and hunt for me, get the wild game that we like, fix the stew that we like to eat, and after we've had dinner together and shared a few laughs, I'm going to give you this blessing. And Rebekah is overhearing this, and I think it's intentional that she's eavesdropping in on him to know what's going on. And then what she does, and this is interesting, is that whereas Isaac and Esau have a conversation that is filled with mutual respect and love, Rebekah says to Jacob a command. I command you to do this, that we're going to deceive your father. And so that's what she does. She tells Jacob, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go into your father, and I'm going to get 2 goats, and we're going to fix this stew, and then I'm going to make some bread and some wine, and you're going to go into your father, and you're going to pretend to be your older brother Esau, so that you get his blessing. Now, when we read this, I tried to make some emphasis there. Did you hear how Rebekah refers to Jacob? My son. Isaac refers to Esau as my son. Rebekah does not refer to Esau as her son. Nowhere do we find where Isaac actually refers to Jacob as his son. Nowhere do we ever find the two parents referring to any of their boys as our boys, our sons. They're playing favorites between the two of them, which sets up the sibling rivalry that takes place. And so what I noticed in this thing is that in the conversations that happen between the boys, there's a whole series of conversations. There's a conversation between Isaac and Esau, and it's a warm conversation. There's a conversation between Jacob and Rebekah, and it's not a warm conversation. She's ordering Jacob what he's supposed to do. There's a conversation between Rebekah and Isaac, and again, it's not a very warm conversation. And there's no conversation anywhere between Rebekah and Esau. And the conversations between Jacob and Isaac are very guarded. And so my suspicion is the relationship between Jacob and Isaac is not the best. They don't see eye to eye. And Rebekah and Isaac are no longer seeing things eye to eye. And the boys are the ones who are paying the penalty for this sibling rivalry that happens. Well, Jacob doesn't want to deceive his father. Did you catch that part? Rebekah commands him, but the NIV doesn't use the word command. The New RSV, New Revised Standard, says Rebekah commands Jacob to do this. And Jacob doesn't want it. He says, my brother's a hairy man, and I have smooth skin. And my father will know that I am not my brother. And when he discovers that I am not my brother, instead of blessing me, he's going to curse me. So no, I don't want to do this. And Rebekah says, no, you're going to. And so they come up with this elaborate disguise, in that she takes the sheepskin from the 2 goats that she kills to make the savory stew, and she attaches it to his arms and to his hands and to his neck, so that he will appear, textural-wise, as his brother Esau. And then she takes Esau's clothes and she dresses him in Esau's clothes. And the whole action in the Hebrew is Rebekah is doing this. And Jacob is being manipulated to do this. And so now he's going to look like or feel like his brother, and he's going to smell like his brother. And so now she sends him into the tent. And so he's taking the stew, and he's taking the wine and the bread, and he goes in there, and then his conversation that he says to his father is that he says, "Here I am." Now, scholars have wondered for a long time, is Rebecca a hero or is she a villain in the story? One of the commentators that I read, and actually I got to hear her give her explanation on this, in that she says that Rebecca is a hero. And her thinking behind this is that Rebecca, when she was pregnant with the twins and they were wrestling inside of her, remember that part of the story? And she goes to God, and God says that there are two nations wrestling within you, and the older will what? Will serve the younger. And so now what happens is they get into this part of the story. Rebecca doesn't trust that Isaac is going to bless the right son, and so she manipulates things to make sure that the right blessing happens to the right boy. And so she is a hero because she is fulfilling God's will. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? Other scoundrel or other people think, though, that she was a scoundrel because it's a different blessing that Isaac wants to give to Esau. It's not the Abraham blessing. And this is where I come down, is that Rebecca is acting like Sarah and Hagar. You have a divine problem, is getting the blessing to Jacob, and she's looking for a human solution. And the means that she uses is deception. Well, the deception works, but barely. And we need to hear the tension in this story. Is it Jacob goes into the tent and he says, "Father, I'm here." And it's a very terse conversation, which I think indicates to the fact that they don't have the best of relationships, but also because he doesn't want to give himself away. And Isaac immediately realizes that something's not right. You know, he's concerned and surprised because he shows up so soon and because he doesn't sound like him. And so he says, "Well, who are you?" And so Jacob responds by saying, "I am your firstborn, Esau." Well, it's a half-truth because technically he is the firstborn now because of having swindled his brother with a bowl of soup to get the right of being the firstborn. So that part is true. But he's not Esau. And so then, Jacob is probably sweating bullets. And it's not just from the sheepskin, okay? He is nervous. This is not a good situation for him. It's very stressful. And so then his father says, "Okay, well, how were you successful so quickly?" So he tells him, "Well, your God blessed me so that I would be able to, get you this stuff." And so then he says, well, come over here so that I might feel you. Well, now you're about ready to puke, right? Because you don't know if the costume, the disguise, is actually going to work. If he's going to realize that it's a sheepskin and it's really not, his brother. And so, very terrifying for him. And so Jacob comes over and his dad, feels him and he says, "God," he says, "I just don't get this." He says, "You feel like your brother Esau, and or you feel like my son Esau, and you made the stuff that I want, but gosh darn it, you don't sound right. There's just something that's not quite right." And Jacob realizes this, but nonetheless, Isaac eats the soup, or the stew that they made. And then one last time, he says to him, "Come over that I might kiss you." Now, if Jacob wasn't ready to throw up now, he's probably in full panic mode. But he comes over, and his father kisses him, and he smells the clothes. And he goes, "The smell of my son, Esau. You smell like the fields." You ever walk by, or driven with your windows down by a field that's just been plowed? That smell of that fresh turned earth. Or in your own yard, just after you mow the grass, the first time you get all the cruddy weeds and all the decayed in it, but the second time, when it really smells good, That's what Esau smells like. Jacob, by the way, smells like the barnyard and hens. Different aroma. And so he says, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth. Now, Canaan gets most of its moisture from dew. So that's how the pastures stay green. And so to give somebody the dew is to give them the best. And then he also says, I'm going to give you the wine and the prosperity and to be a blessing. Now, this is not the Abraham blessing. He's not blessing him with offspring. He's not giving him the land. He's not saying, I'm going to bless you if people bless you, and I'm going to curse those who curse you, although that's part of this blessing. It's an economic, agricultural blessing. He gives him success, because that's what he wanted for Esau, because he knew that Jacob was going to get the Abraham blessing. He wanted his favorite son to succeed. And so he does this. And so Jacob, as soon as that blessing is over, he skedaddles. He gets out of the tent. Now, Rebekah, this would have been a stressful time for Rebekah too. She was probably just outside the tent, eavesdropping, listening as to this blessing that's going on. But she also would have been scanning the horizon in case Esau shows up. Because can you imagine how difficult it would have been if Esau would have shown up when Isaac and Jacob were still inside the tent? And so it was extremely stressful for the both of them. And now all of a sudden Esau does show up, and Jacob is probably trying to peel off sheepskin that's been glued to his skin and getting rid of the clothes, trying to get rid of the evidence, which is not going to do him a bit of good to get rid of the evidence, because they're going to discover who the deceptive person was. And so now Esau shows up, and he makes his savory stew, and he goes into his father's tent. And notice how warm his greeting is to his dad. He comes in and he says, "Let my father sit up and eat." Can you hear the pride and excitement in his voice? Dad, I got it. I got the favorite stew that you like. Let's eat. Let's celebrate. Let's talk some sports. We can commiserate that the Shockers got beat so bad. And they were going to have a good time. And he says, after we've had our time and we celebrate, then you can bless me. And Esau, or Isaac, starts trembling. And he doesn't need to ask the question, but he does. Who are you? And who was just here? They know who it was. They know that it was Jacob. And yet, it really wasn't Jacob, was it? It was Rebekah. It was Rebekah who did the deception. And so, Esau falls before his father and he says, bless me also. And Isaac doesn't have a blessing for Esau. And so he gives him a sort of blessing. And in this sort of blessing, he says, well, you will be away from the dew, the good, and you will live by the sword, and eventually you're going to throw off your brother's yoke. And so basically what he's saying in this sort of blessing is that things are going to be tough for you, but you're going to make it. You're going to throw off your brother's yoke eventually, and the Edomites do. And so this blessing basically explains the difficulties that the Israelites have with the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, throughout history. Well, the other observation that I make is about blessings. Blessings are given by the head of the family. So Isaac was supposed to give this blessing. And so he's responsible for that. The Abraham blessing is the one that gets passed down to the firstborn, and that's the covenant that gets passed down. And Isaac is going to give this covenant blessing to Jacob in a little bit. But blessings were seen as being irreversible. That once you bless somebody, that was it. You couldn't take it back, and you couldn't alter it or change it. So that's why Esau and Isaac were so upset when Jacob stole this blessing, because And blessings were seen as having future implications. That they were prophetic, they were prophecies. Well, the story doesn't end. In that Esau is ticked off. He's angry now. He's gone from being grieving and upset to where he wants revenge. And so he threatens to kill his brother. He's planning on doing that. And so Rebecca realizes that she needs to get Jacob out of Dodge, or he's not going to make it. And so she's got to figure out, how do I get Jacob away? And so the way that she does that is that Esau has two wives. One of them is Judith, and the other is Basemath. And both of these women are Canaanite women. And some of the scholars, in order to try to justify why Esau wasn't a good guy, is they say that he didn't wait for his father to arrange a wedding for him. That he was lustful and selfish. So he took these local girls to marry, violating his father's wishes, and that these women were just absolutely terrible and were making life miserable for them. And there might be some truth to that. Probably is some truth to that. But nonetheless, this is what Rebecca latches up on. She says, okay, Isaac, we need to make sure that Jacob marries the proper girl, the right girl. And so let's send him back to my brother Laban, and we will find a proper wife for him. And so we're going to get him out of town. So Isaac agrees to this, and this is when he then gives to Jacob the Abraham blessing. May you have many offspring. May you return and inherit the promised land. And may God bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And then Jacob makes his escape. Now, everything else that I'm going to tell you is my opinion, okay? So this is no longer scripture. This is no longer anything that you need to accept, all right? So this is just my opinion. I will also say that I think my opinion has some weight. It's not, if you take notes, put an asterisk beside this, that this is not necessarily the way things are. Most of the time, the story of Jacob and Esau is seen as a story of sibling rivalry. And what we know about sibling rivalry is the competition between children within a family. What research has shown us, and I've seen this in research that was done in Michigan and Minnesota and Iowa, and what they have demonstrated is that sibling rivalry is usually temporary, that it peaks between the ages of 5 and 15 with the kids, that in almost all cases, sibling rivalry does no damage to the relationship of the children or the family. It's just it's a stage that children and families go through. It isn't anything to particularly worry about, except sometimes. And when sibling rivalries become dangerous, it's when the parents act like Isaac and Rebekah and play favorites with their kids. Now, parents never treat their children the same, and you shouldn't treat your children the same because your children are different. But you do need to love them and treat them fairly. They need to know that they are loved. But Isaac and Rebekah don't do that. They very specifically play favorites with their kids. So when sibling rivalry continues on into adulthood, it's usually because the children were pitted against each other by the parents, or finances get involved. So you find the kids fighting over the inheritance. And that's usually trying to keep score again. Well, I don't think that that's what actually is happening in this story. Remember when we looked at family systems theory? And we're going to look at family systems theory some more in these Genesis stories. But the theory between family systems is that families are a system. We use the illustration of plumbing, and the plumbing in your house is a system. And so the sink that backs up or the pipe that leaks is not necessarily the pipe or the sink where the problem is. It's just the symptom bearer. That's the weak link, and so that's where you see the problem. And so if you replace that pipe or if you replace that sink, You haven't solved the problem because the whole system is the problem, and all you're probably going to do is move the symptom someplace else. And the next weak link is going to show up. Well, the weak link in Jacob and with Jacob and Esau is sibling rivalry. But I think what the real problem is we have a marriage that's gone bad. We have a marriage that's gone bad. This is my speculation, but I think I can defend this. And then, first off, is Isaac was 40 years old when he got married, and his wedding was arranged. And this is the only wedding among the patriarchs which is arranged, by the way. Isaac, I don't think, was even aware that his father Abraham was arranging the marriage for him. Just all of a sudden, Rebecca shows up at his tent, and he falls in love with her. I mean, they do start out in love. And the other thing is, Isaac is the only patriarch who has just one wife. All the others have multiple wives. And so there's various things to that. It could also be like the parents who have two kids, and you say to the second child, if we'd have had you first, it would have been an only child. That was funny, I thought. That's because I was the second child. Rebecca probably was only about 19 or 20 when she got married. So you have an age difference between them. Secondly, Rebecca's from Kansas City. She grew up in the city. She grew up around wealth. She was able to wear nice clothes and drive cars and have all the latest stuff. And that's what she was used to. Isaac grew up on a ranch out by Oberlin, long ways away from everything. And although he was wealthy, he didn't have anything, he didn't want anything. Isaac was a loner. He was, isolation was normal for him. For Rebecca, isolation was a hardship. And so you have these two people with very little in common being thrust together. And the other thing that makes this thing interesting is that when Abraham's servant came to Laban and to Rebecca and says, I want you to go out and marry Isaac, Rebecca says yes immediately. And there is no waiting period. She just takes off. And so part of what I think is happening here is that Rebecca is not just so much interested in marrying Isaac, she also is interested in getting away from her family. There's a mixed reason for this going on. And so either way, she goes out there and she marries him. They end up having trust issues. In the same way that Abraham said to Sarah, I want you to lie for me, and say that you're really not my wife, but you're my sister, which was a half-truth. Isaac pulls the same stunt with Rebecca, except there is no half-truth. It's just a flat-out lie. And so she does this. And whereas Sarah seems to accept this deception, I think that Rebecca resents it. And part of why I think that she resents this is that her family of origin was a family that lying, deceiving, and cheating was normal. And I think part of why she wanted to get away from her family was because of this. She marries Isaac, and what's he do? Pulls the same stunt. And I think that she resents this. This isn't what I was bargaining for. And so Isaac seems to be indifferent to her suffering, indifferent to how she is feeling, so that he's like that cat. I see your point, but I still don't care. I think that's how Isaac is treating her. Rebecca is from a family of greedy liars. We'll find out in the next couple of chapters here. And she also has an issue of infertility. Now, I don't know if we can realize how much stress that puts her under, being infertile. She knows about the Abraham promise. Many offspring. I'm supposed to produce many offspring. It's 20 years that she struggles with trying to have children, and I think that added tension to the relationship as to what was going on. And then when she finally does get married or get pregnant, it's a very, very difficult pregnancy. The babies are wrestling inside of her, and she is miserable, and she thinks, if this is the way things are going to be, I don't want any part of this. And so then she goes to God, and God says that you have two nations that are wrestling between her. And then, sure enough, when the babies are born, again, here's the speculation on my part, is I think that they were premature. The reason why I think they're premature is because it's very common with twins, but also premature babies frequently will be covered with hair. They'll have this fine mantle of hair on them. And what do we know about Esau? Covered with hair. I think he had some sort of a birth defect. Not, a mental birth defect, but something. And Jacob came out looking perfect. Now, if you're a first-time mother, what's the first thing you do when you have your babies? You count things, right? Make sure all the parts are there. They're supposed to be there. And you want your baby to look normal. You want them to be pink, or if they're colored, you want them to be black or whatever. And you want your baby to look like you, look normal. Esau doesn't look normal. There's something wrong with him. Jacob looks normal. Isaac has bad eyesight. He doesn't care. He can't see a difference. And I think somehow Rebekah was not able to bond with Esau properly. But she could bond with Isaac. With Jacob. And so Jacob becomes her favorite, and Esau she struggles with. Now the other thing that I've read in research, and you've probably read this stuff too, and it's disturbing, but it's true, is that the most likely children to be abused are preemies and babies who have some sort of a birth defect. It's just the opposite of what you think, isn't it? And the reason why they think it's because of preemies, because where do preemies end up as soon as they're born? Yeah, I see you in an incubator. And you don't get to hold them. And touch is crucial to bonding. So when you don't get to hold the baby, you don't bond. And I think that Rebekah had a hard time holding this hairy baby. And so she just didn't bond. Not speculation on my part, okay? You can't say that this is what the Bible says. It doesn't, but that's my speculation. So then, you have a birth order issue. Rebekah is the baby in her family. She got married thinking that she was going to be taken care of. Isaac, although he is the firstborn for Sarah, is actually the baby in the family. He's thinking that he's going to be taken care of. So you have two babies who get married, both of them expecting the other to meet their needs and to take care of them, and that's not the way it's working out for them at all. So they're struggling with that. When Isaac and Rebekah get married, Isaac falls in love with Rebekah, but you remember when we said that he took her to Sarah's tent to consummate the marriage? Remember when we said that part? That's just creepy. And what psychologists and stuff are hinting at is that Isaac was fused with his mother Sarah. And they probably say that went back to what happened on Mount Moriah when his father tried to kill him. That although he loved Abraham and realized, that that was God's hand in there, nonetheless there was some tough issues now between Abraham and Isaac. He gets closer to his mother Sarah, and then when Sarah dies, he struggles with the grief. And he was away from Sarah when she died. He wasn't there for that. And so somehow he gets a hold of her tent, and now when he marries Rebekah, he takes her to his tent. And so the speculation is that Isaac was not so much looking for a wife. He was looking for a substitute mother, somebody to take care of. And Rebekah, the relationship between her and Isaac suffers. Isaac is always hanging around with Esau so that they are gone all the time. Jacob hangs around the tent, and so Jacob becomes a replacement for Isaac. I don't think there's any incestuous stuff going on here, but she bonds even closer to Jacob now than she is to her own husband. Now again, that was all speculation on my part. So what does it mean? Here's what I think it means. Is that Rebecca and Isaac, I think, begin to project their issues onto their boys. They play favorites, and that results in the sibling rivalry, which becomes a family legacy. That Jacob is going to play favorites with his boys. Remember who he plays favorites with? You know, Joseph, the guy with the coat of many colors, and he passes that down. And so it becomes a family legacy. And so playing favorites will become an issue. But we have a problem with the story. And we should have a problem with the story because it's not fair. It just isn't fair. And so we want explanations and we want justice. You know, we think it's a good deal when Jacob runs away to his Uncle Laban and Uncle Laban plays tricks on him. You know, that's just payback. You know, that's what ought to happen, you know, because he's such a scoundrel. But the point, I think, of the story, and why this is even in the Bible, is that Abraham didn't deserve God's grace. Isaac didn't deserve God's grace. Neither Jacob or Esau deserve God's grace. You and I don't deserve it. None of us do. That's the point. Is that we are Jacob, we are scoundrels, we are Rebecca, we are these people. And yet somehow God still loves us anyway. And the promise gets passed down not by merit, but because of God's love. And eventually we experience God's love in Jesus, who does for us what none of us deserve. And he dies for us. So here's what we're going to look at next week. Because we're going to, you know, God's got a problem now. You know, Jacob's a mess. And he's got to start changing him. And we're going to see how God begins to transform Jacob. He still stays a scoundrel, by the way. But there is a change that begins to happen. And that gives